Don't wait for life to happen to you because you could be waiting for a really long time. So if you want to make something happen, just take it into your own hands. Curate your own show, reach out to people.
The art world is always changing. It's a dynamic space where creativity and commerce collide. Finding your path and staying true to your craft isn't easy. Welcome to the Professional Artist Podcast. This show explores what it truly takes to build a meaningful and sustainable art career. Each week, we offer intimate deep dives that reveal which art business practices actually work, giving you the inspiration and insight to fuel your artistic journey. I'm your host today, Miguel Mayer, and in this episode, we're diving into the world of Dina Brodsky, a realist, miniatures painter and curator. With over 1 million followers in social media, she's a faculty expert at the Professional Artist Association. With an MFA from the New York Academy of Art and years of honing her craft in New York City, Dina has built a career that blends the traditions of miniature painting with a modern, deeply personal approach. In this occasion, we're exploring the unique journey that has shaped Dina's artistic identity and career. Here's what you'll gain from this deep dive. Building community through art. Dina shows how artist collaboration and peer support can create meaningful impact. The balance between passion and practicality. She shares strategies for balancing personal art, commercial work, and parenthood. Taking control of your career. Dina explains how she built her own path to success in a thriving online art community. All right, let's explore the inspiring world of Dina Brodsky. Let's begin with an artwork that best represents your artistic worldview or your practice. Can you describe it and why did you choose that artwork?
The artwork I chose is not a finished painting. It's a sketchbook page, and I think it just represents a time in my life where a lot of things were outwardly shifting. I was also stuck at home with small children, and I had a lot of time to think. So the sketchbook page I chose was sort of this cumulative page, which I worked on over the course of several weeks, just a little bit at a time, while having kind of time to process everything else that was going on. It's a bunch of ravens. I've always been into birds, but corvids specifically. It actually started with someone telling me that a raven has the intelligence of a 7-year-old child. And both my kids were smaller than that at the time. So they're absolutely fascinating. They're incredibly intelligent. They're very communal. They try to take care of their sick. They have funerals for their dead, which no other birds do.
Dina shares how her love for miniature painting began in childhood. Despite pressure to, quote, paint bigger, she stayed true to her tiny scale vision, now a celebrated signature embraced by galleries and collectors.
I have always loved miniatures. My first drawings were very, very tiny, to the point where my mother, when we're still back in Belarus, she was an artsy person, and a lot of her college friends, she had me basically straight out of college. So a lot of her college friends were artists, and she took me to one of their studios to see if I wanted to study with them. And I was like 4 or 5 at the time. And he told me to draw a princess, and he put me in front of this giant piece of paper on an easel, and I drew this teeny tiny princess that was about 1/2 inch tall. And he was like, no, can we do the same thing but bigger? And I drew another teeny tiny princess. And after a few more tries, he actually told my mother that I was unteachable and that I should not be joining his studio because I couldn't learn anything. And since then, I've had lots of other people tell me that I was unteachable, and lots of other people tell me that I should paint bigger. And that's actually only stopped probably in the last few years, where I think I've accepted myself for who I am, but also galleries and collectors have also accepted who I am and just stopped telling me to paint bigger. It doesn't really fit into the art world very well. On one hand, there's been a long tradition of miniature painting where people have been doing it for hundreds of years. And there's Islamic manuscript illumination, and there was the books of hours in Christianity. And there's been a long history of miniature painting. But I think there hasn't really been such a thing as a rich, famous miniature painter. And honestly, I think because the art world has always favored things that are bigger, which in a way is a little bit ridiculous because you never go to a museum, you look at a painting and you're like, you know why I love this painting? I love it because it's enormous. You love it because it's meaningful. You love it because It speaks to you. It makes you think. It makes you feel. You never love it because of scale. I think the reason miniaturists have had such a difficult time, it probably comes down to kind of economics. You can sell a bigger painting for more money. And so galleries tend to encourage that.
Dina reflects on a turning point early in her career, which started as a small local effort and eventually grew into a viral art movement, showing how collaboration can reshape an artist's path.
A long time ago, back when social media was just becoming a thing, back when the more traditional gallery world was still the way that me and all of my friends thought that our career would go. Me and a lot of my friends were kind of struggling. We were having a difficult time getting our work shown because it felt like there was so little space for it in New York in, I don't know, 2012, 2013. We were trying to figure out what to do at this cafe called the Anyway Cafe in New York. And we were like, let's start an art movement. And no one's willing to show our work. It doesn't matter. We're just going to show each other. And we're going to put together shows that have the work of the people we think is meaningful. And a lot of the advice we're getting was you should be in dialogue with the contemporary art world. And at that moment, at least the Chelsea art world in New York, those were not the people I wanted to be in dialogue with. That wasn't the conversation I wanted to have. And the conversation I did want to have, I knew a lot of the people I wanted to have it with because I knew a lot of them in person. And I was just probably starting to discover more contemporary artists' work via Facebook. And so we're like, all right, let's start an art movement. And we decided to call it Paint Anyway because we're at the Anyway Cafe. There's maybe 7 or 8 of us at that gathering, and each one of us had a show that we wanted to put together and maybe 20, 30 people that we could think of being in that show. And I think I was probably the first one to find a space for mine. I think it was a drawing show. And I found a gallery that was willing to do it. And my friends that were there said yes to being in that show. But all these other people whose work I just admired from a distance said yes too. And I was like, oh, wait, you can do this? Like, you can reach out to people that you don't know, tell them that you're putting together an exhibition, and they're going to say yes. Your destiny as an artist doesn't have to depend on a random gatekeeper, right? It can be you, and it can be your friends. And we created this hashtag called Paint Anyway, just to share work internally, the curatorial part of my career. That was how it started. So at first it was just the 7 of us using it. And then the people that were in our show, because we asked them to use the hashtag. But then at some point within a few months, I would check the hashtag to see what my friends were doing. And I saw strangers using it. I don't think that art movement maybe changed the world the way we hoped it would. But the last time I checked that hashtag, there was like 250,000 people who'd used it. It became a viral hashtag where, at least initially, the people that used it had a similar sort of taste to us. They valued some of the same things we did. And then eventually it just became one of the big painting hashtags.
Balancing personal passion projects with commercial work is a constant juggling act. After decades of persistence, Dina has finally reached a point where she can choose projects that truly inspire her while staying grounded in her artistic practice.
So I want to do everything. I want to do like 10 things, like write a book about artist sketchbooks and have a podcast and work on a year-long botanical illustration project. And there's time to do like 1.5 things. And one of those things is parenthood, because it takes up a pretty large chunk of life. And then there's a part of life where money needs to get made. So I think I throw 5 balls up in the air and 2 of them are always dropping, and I try not to drop the important ones. The balance the last few months has been more towards these 2 big projects for big companies, which left me with very little room for my own stuff, like the stuff that I do for fun and because I love it. And right now that I'm kind of finishing the second of them, I'm like, I can't wait to be a little directionless. I want to be in that state where I'm looking for something and kind of finding my way, because things have been so straightforward. I need to finish this by this deadline and then move on to the next deadline. And that's been my last few months. But then if I'm too directionless for too long, I find myself working on 10 things at a time and none of them get finished. I realize how much of a miracle it is that someone found me and offered me money to do some things that I love doing anyway. Honestly, a lot of it has been Instagram and just people finding me that way. I take a lot of detours, but I have this theory that if you stick to doing something, literally anything, for about 5 years, you will be able to make a living at it. And having those 5 years to figure it out, not everyone has that, right? I've been doing this for 20 something years. I sold my first painting when I was probably 19, and I'm 43 now. And in one way or another, I've been making a living as an artist ever since, whether that involved doing commissions, teaching art, having shows, I don't know, selling prints, whatever it's been. I've been doing something that was painting related. So basically, if you stick it out, I think I've just stuck it out for long enough where I have this great privilege of being able to say no to things that I am either not interested in or are very low paid. I've also spent a lot of years doing anything art related, no matter how little it paid. And right now I have the privilege of being able to choose.
Choosing what to pursue next as an artist depends on many factors. Dina shares how she balances intuition, opportunity, and real-world needs when deciding her next project.
As far as art goes, I don't regret any of it. I have spent a lot of years saying yes to everything. If it involved painting, I would say yes, no matter how little it paid and no matter how that painting would disappear into a collector's home and would never get seen publicly. And I was like, yes, yes to it all. But I don't really regret those decisions either. It's finding a balance between a few things. And part of it is, I don't know, for many of the last number of years, I was a single parent. And so like I all of a sudden needed to make enough money for myself, which I've always been able to do, but all of a sudden make enough money for two small children, which turned out to be a lot more money than I needed for myself. So I think some of it is like, okay, there's a certain amount of bills that need to get paid. What would be the most interesting way to go about paying them? And for the last few years, my strategy for that has been, what is a low-hanging fruit? Like, what's some things that I know really well, which I could turn into something lucrative, at least for a while. And honestly, that tends to be teaching. There's a lot of really amazing people who paint and who teach. Is there anything I have to say that maybe hasn't been said before or differently? So I pick a subject, and then I tend to base both the teaching and the painting for that year around that. So for about a year, that subject was tree drawing, and I was putting together a class, but I was also putting together a body of work that ended up being my gallery show for that year. But it was also a chance to take something I loved and research the history of it, just take a deep dive. I've grown to love teaching as well, which wasn't always the case. I used to be scared of it.
Community has been central to Dina's journey as an artist. Next, she will tell us about a project that brought together hundreds of artists to make real-world impact and how that experience shaped her sense of peer support.
So I guess there's those kind of initial years of the Paint Anyway movement and all the shows we put together around that. The painting was this little bird that I used to launch the Birds for Sophia project. And it was this kind of fundraising things that I got involved in for a Russian baby with spinal muscular atrophy. And she needed this very expensive medication that was not available in Russia. And so basically her parents were trying to raise like $2.2 million, and they had 2 months to do this before their child would deteriorate so much that medicine would no longer help her. I used that little painting to talk an initial group of artists into participating in this project just to bring visibility and fundraise. And it was during lockdown. And I think maybe that helped artists come together. And that was one of those kind of like Paint Anyway. It was one of these things that went viral, and eventually over 1,000 artists participated until a donor came and bridged the very large gap between what her parents had and what was needed. And she got the medication in time. But these artists, they painted birds and they spread the message, and they would reach out to the company that made the drug, and eventually something worked. So it made me see the power of painting in a way, the power to make a substantial difference. It's one of the more meaningful things that I've seen happen with both painting and social media and all of these things coming together.
Let's explore how an artist can turn an online connection into a meaningful relationship. Dina shares her experience of seeing followers as real people and how authenticity and generosity have helped her to build a truly engaged community.
So for the first while, I did this actually. I'm a dork. I like all these algorithms. I like figuring out what they do. And I almost didn't seize this. It just looked like statistics to me. I'm like, okay, if this many people liked it or saved it or whatever it was. And then I had my real life where I have a really big close knit family and a lot of just real life friends. So I almost didn't associate the internet world with the real world. I'm like, okay, my real life happens in the real world and these are just numbers. And I think after that birth certificate thing, I realized all of these people, each one of them has a life and a story that is as interesting and as complex as mine is. So I think for me, that was a turning point also where I'm like, wait, these are all real people. These aren't just numbers. So there's things that you can do for numbers. And I tend to do those things because they help make a living. But there's also, I think, being a real person and willing to be vulnerable, being willing to share information. 20, 25 years ago, people were much more reluctant, like people my age and people maybe a generation older, were much more reluctant to share resources because it felt like if you're in this gallery, there's less room for me to be in this gallery. So information was almost like hoarded, right? And right now, there's a lot of problems with the internet world and the phone world and how it's messed up everyone's attention span. But one of the good things is resources no longer feel finite. There's enough of an audience. There's enough resources for everyone to have a place and everyone to be able to make a living. And so I think just maybe be generous, be a real person and be generous with your knowledge and with your story.
Dina reflects on navigating the traditional art world and building relationships with curators, critics, and institutions. She explains how creating her own systems often proved more effective than trying to fit into established gatekeeping structures.
So for a little bit during the peak of that paint anyway curatorial movement, I would try really hard to have these relationships and I would find these art critics and invite them to my apartment and try to wine and dine them and try to get them to write about my show or our movement or the people in the movement. And honestly, I don't think I was very good at this. I tried to network and I tried to hustle, and I did not like a lot of the people I met that way. Some of the more old school art critics I did not have a good experience with. There's people who have a better time with an established system than I have had. I've applied to a ton of grants and I've gotten none of them. I've applied to a ton of residencies and I've also gotten none of them. And the ones I have gotten more recently have been through people who just found me through Instagram or through taking my class and offered me. But most things I've applied to, probably all things I've applied to, I've gotten rejected from. And I think at some point I made my peace with that and just stopped applying. And that was sort of part of the point of that paint anyway. It's like, if we can't find the gatekeepers that like us, let's create our own system. So I've been much better at creating my own system that works for me, right? And it works for me. It works for a lot of the people I love and care about.
Looking back, Dina, is there anything that you wish you had known earlier in your artist journey?
I wish I hadn't spent as long as I did waiting for someone to discover me. I came out of grad school with probably like a little bit of an ego, and I just thought that if I worked really, really hard and made really, really good paintings, someone would just find me. And there wasn't a plan on how that would go down. I just kind of figured that I would get discovered and I would have a gallery show at an amazing gallery and people would buy my work and then someone would write it up in an article and I would have an art career. And I spent probably like 6, 7 years after grad school just waiting for that to happen. If I could go back to myself, I'd just be like, that person doesn't exist. There's very few people for whom that magical curator or that magical gallery just swoops down, sells their work for a ton of money, and then they can make a living. And I've known a few people for whom that has happened and coincides with them being extremely good painters and extremely hard workers and also being in the right place at the right time. But also the art world favors those who have time to paint. And a lot of the people I've known for whom that has happened also had a trust fund. And so they could spend those 5 years just making that really good body of work without having to worry about making money as well. So the fact that you can take it, especially right now in 2025, you can take it into your own hands entirely. I had this a student a few days ago where a year ago she was working some tech jobs that she felt was draining her. She dropped the tech job and just for fun started arranging flowers and putting up flower bouquets on Instagram. And now she's got a few 100,000 people following her. She's got a deal with a major company. She's just written a book. And all of that happened in a year. In my case, it took, 24 years or something like that. For her, it's a year and her life is completely transformed. And it can happen to anyone probably much faster than it could years ago.
To finish this episode, Dina shares empowering advice for artists. She encourages taking initiative, following what you love, and being consistent to build a sustainable career on your own terms.
I feel like a lot of artists come in there, thinking, I'm not a good business person, or I'm bad at this, I'm bad at marketing. And that's almost like a story that you tell yourself. And I have to say, I told that story to myself for years, actually until I became a single parent and all of a sudden I had no choice. It took a little bit of time, but once I had to do it, I got better at it. And would I have chosen to learn marketing and to learn the business part of art if I had a really good gallery taking care of me? But once I started doing it, I was like, okay, there's nothing embarrassing about being a good business person. And there's nothing glamorous about being broke either. There's nothing glamorous about being a starving artist, because what you wind up thinking about when you're a starving artist is actually money and paying the rent. And all of that stuff is really not interesting. And when you don't have to think about it, you can think about art and making meaningful art and kind of the next project. Don't wait for life to happen to you, because you could be waiting for a really long time. So if you want to make something happen, just take it into your own hands. Curate your own show, reach out to people, find a space, or do it online. Whatever it is, life is short and fragile in a way, and anything could happen at any moment. I know so many people who found just an entirely unique way of making their life work. And the one thing that they've all had in common is they didn't wait for things to be perfect. They didn't wait for the stars to align. You can't control everything in life, right? But you can pick a direction and kind of tend to it. That student of mine was the flower arranging. I think she picked a direction, even accidentally. She put a bouquet together. She posted it online. It got a little bit of a response. She did it again. And the next thing she knows, she's publishing a book, right? And I had another student that did this for tiny wax seals, right? Who knew that there's a life to be made around that and a history of them? And who knew that wax seals could be so interesting? It feels a little bit naive to be like, hey, just pick what you love and do it all the time. But sometimes it really, pick what you love and do it some of the time consistently, and you'll be able to build a life around that.
Dina Brodsky's journey highlights the power of individuality, resilience, and self-determination. By blending miniature painting with personal storytelling, she has created a unique artistic voice. Through community initiatives and social media, she shows that artists can thrive by creating their own opportunities and staying true to their vision, proving that art can inspire and bring people together. This podcast grows because people like you share it. So if you got value today, if it inspired you to think differently or take action, hit follow or subscribe and send it to one person who needs to hear it. That's how we keep making more episodes. Thank you for listening to the Professional Artist Podcast. And until next time.